Will. Okay, great. I see I've got a helper here. So we are recording now. So let's go ahead and begin by closing our eyes, centering ourselves, and do a little chanting. I have a few people in the room with me here at the Institute, so they can chant with me, call and response. But let's start by chanting Om first. In this way, sitting with the eyes closed, we no longer see distance. And let's use these mantras to attune ourselves to the level at which we are already together, sharing the same ground of being. Inhale. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om.
Hari Om, Hari Om,
Hari Hari Hari
Om.
Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari Om.
Hari Om,
Hari Om, Hari Hari Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om.
Hari Om,
Hari Om, Hari Hari Hari. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om.
Hari Om,
Hari Om, Hari 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 Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om.
Hari Om,
Hari Om, Hari 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 Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari Om. Om Shanti. Om Shanti. Thank you all for coming. Particularly grateful that Arjavan from Yogaville, Arjavan Kovalenko, has agreed to join us. I'll introduce you a little more thoroughly, Arjavan, in a moment. But I wanted Arjavan to be here with us to address this topic of how do we as yogis, as spiritual practitioners, how do we respond to all the troublesome events in our world? It may be easy for us, in light of what's happening, to simply shrug our shoulders, say, what can we do? We might get tired of seeing so much disturbing news day after day after day, which is primarily what's reported. So we may turn away from it altogether, or we may get angry and frustrated, right? We may donate. There are so many different things that each of us, different stages and phases that we might go through in responding to what we see. And there's a lot of darkness to see, right? Arjavan is from Ukraine, so I was particularly interested to have his perspective, because that's one of the primary places where we're witnessing suffering in our world is that war in Ukraine, where hundreds of people are dying every day, and the country of Ukraine is being bombarded relentlessly. But it's not only there, right? There's violence happening all over the world. In the United States, we've recently witnessed shootings, right? In Buffalo, at a supermarket, in Texas, at a school of all places. Right? We see this kind of violence again and again. On top of that, we have the pandemic that's created a lot of suffering and trauma, especially in marginalized communities where they have fewer resources to cope with things like this, fewer savings to rely on. And even before the war in Ukraine and the pandemic, we had the climate emergency, right? That's not going away just because we're distracted from paying attention to it. Mm-hmm. And that climate crisis alone is creating so much suffering in our world. Along with that, we have growing financial disparity between the rich and the poor. Ever more polarization in the United States between the political parties, which make it seem less likely that the elected officials that are meant to protect the people will really be able to do anything to solve these complex problems. I know a few people close to me have responded with a lot of anger and frustration, a lot of worry about what the Supreme Court justices are doing in the United States, the way they overturned Roe versus Wade and are endangering abortion, and the way they may have their sights set on LGBT rights in this country and other things that favor the well-being of people. So there's so many things that we could be reacting to. And I want us to create a dialogue. This is not a speech, a lecture. This is a dialogue where I want us all to think together about what this means to us. How can we meaningfully respond? How can we stay engaged without turning away? And how can we in some way contribute? In some way, instead of losing hope and giving up, feel like we can make a difference. And as I said before, that's one of the reasons that I wanted Arjavan to come, and even his father to share with us. Because I can't imagine what it's like to have my homeland, right, as Ukraine is the homeland of Arjuna and his father, being bombarded constantly. My own neighbors, right, in danger constantly. And I could imagine that Arjavan has gone through his own struggles with coping with this and finding his way to stay attuned to what's happening. So let me introduce you a little more, Arjavan. Many of you know Arjavan as someone who has lived at Yogaville for 4 or 5 years now. He served there for a long time in the audio-video department, also as a yoga teacher and as a Raja Yoga teacher. And my understanding, Arjavan, is that you were instrumental in helping Yogaville switch from the normal in-person methods that we were using to the online methodology, and in creating this beautiful resource called Integral Yoga TV. So thank you for that service that you've done for all of us, Arjavan, and for joining us today. So please, I just invite you to share what your experience has been like with this war in Ukraine. And then whenever you feel it's appropriate, to invite your father also.
Okay, Swamiji, thank you so much for the kind introduction, although I have to mention that giving me way too much credit. With Integral Yoga TV and all the transition from pre-COVID to post-COVID Yogaville, there was a group effort and a lot of people made huge contributions. So I would never be able to do anything like that for myself without a great team. So yes, I'm originally from Ukraine. I was born there and lived there for 18 years. It's a dear place to me, and the city I'm born is Kharkiv, which is very close to the Russian border. So that's true. I am affected a lot by what's happening. Although to be fair, I wasn't there physically present myself. So it's not comparable to, let's say, what my father had experienced, my mother had experienced, all my friends, family who is there, who are there still and who left. So that's why I have my father right next to me. His name is Yuri.
Hi.
So he will join the discussion as well. Feel free to ask him any questions if you want firsthand experience. And also he is very dedicated to studying both sides. So he trying to get the objective information. And as a scientist, he's also a climate scientist. His goal is objective information. So just facts and not specifically opinions or something that emotionally comfortable. So that objectivity, I think, is a very valuable in such dramatic situation. It's very easy to lose objectivity in these situations when emotions are involved. So we are very concerned about this situation because it's close to us, but there are other problems and global problems that we all encounter. And I understand that everyone has different attitude towards them, depending how close in proximity are they from this problem. Let's say this federal, this abortion court decision affects some people way more than others. And perhaps for you, it could be an enormous tragedy. For somebody else, it may not be as big of a deal. For some people respond differently. So different problems affect us differently. But what do we do? How do we stand up for our values in a yogic manner? So, for me in this situation, my background is 7 years of deep practice of integral yoga. So I've trained myself, trained my mind to always assess whether it disturbs my peace. This was taught to me by Swami Satchidananda as, not in person, but through his teachings, as one of the most important measuring devices in order to accomplish the yogic goal, right? So if it disturbs my peace, then I'm doing something wrong. Maybe my attitude is wrong, maybe I don't know what, but something isn't right, and it's important to look into it. So whether the event disturbed my peace or not was always a big deal. And on February 24th, I was woken up with a phone call, and I was told that the war had started and that my native city is being bombed and all people I love are now in huge danger. And of course, it disturbed my peace. And then my peace get even more disturbed by the fact that I knew that my peace was disturbed. So it was a challenging situation, and I had to figure the way out. And knowing Bhagavad Gita, it obviously came to mind, where two sides of my family on both sides, and now there's a war, and that's the Dharma, that's what's happening. And first thing first was to deal with my own resentment towards this. I really desperately wanted the whole thing to stop, and I couldn't comprehend how could it even happen. So I understand that being upset, angry, have anxiety, feeling of hopelessness, all of that arose in me, and I acknowledged that that's the case. And then I needed to move past that in order to be useful. Because how can I be useful if I'm anxious and worried and fearful and depressed? So this was my number one task, and I went on a mission finding out how I can be useful, because that would bring a relief to me, knowing that I'm actually contributing something positive to the situation, and being occupied in small ways, in ways that I can make a difference. So that was my goal from outset, to find those actions that would lead to bring me to that relief. So, in yogic philosophy, we know about this concept of Kali Yuga, that we actually are living in this time where these events are more abundant. And maybe they even not more abundant, but what's happening is we are really witnessing a lot of this because of the information accessibility. We have internet, we have TV. Whatever happens in the world, we witness it very soon after, or actually we're witnessing it live. So we're bombarded with these events all the time, and I think it's crucial for us to find these ways that we can do something about it without sacrificing too much, because there's so much happening. So that was my goal. And um, so I had to maintain peace. I had a context that I cannot change much, and this helped me to reflect on the position of Russians who woke up as well to this situation. And now they know that their government is attacking another country. What do they do? What do those people do? And why can't they stop? And it made me think, I thought, well, should I blame people for not standing up for what's right? And why are they not standing up for what's right? And I know that, let's say, for average person, they know if they even call this situation a war, they're gonna get in a lot of trouble.
Mm.
So there's fear. There is also belief, and I know this for a fact, and culture where I'm coming from, this belief is dominant, that I'm a small person and I don't have a way to affect these big events. But if you look at it philosophically, if everyone says that I'm a small person and I don't have a way to make a difference, then nothing will ever happen, because everyone believes that. But if everyone believes that even my little contribution makes a difference, then big change could occur. So I think that I came up to this realization that each individual person should have faith that their action can make a difference and makes a difference. So this was one of the biggest realization that allowed me to move forward past my doubts, past my um, feeling of hopelessness. Also, a lot of people deal with another problem. Actually, we all deal with, in a yogic term, ignorance, right? Not knowing the difference between real and unreal, pure and pure, permanent and permanent. So we all know this concept, and it also helped me to contextualize that a lot of people just don't know the truth. And it's really hard to understand what is going on for many people because they don't have access to the information. They were conditioned a certain way, and it shouldn't be a reason for my resentment. It should help me to understand and accept what's happening better. So we have ignorance, and we have, on the other hand, a lack of faith that they can make a change. And I feel like with first one, what we can do is inform each other about the problem in a very subtle, unimposing way. I feel like access to the objective information is important, and sharing with friends what's important in having conversations and the dialogue is essential. And especially it's important when you have some trust built in your relationship, and people will more likely to listen. And then, of course, the second one is faith that your actions can make a difference. Another yogic concept is ahimsa, nonviolence. So I thought that my action as a yogi should be nonviolent. So I'm not going to support, sending weapons somewhere, but I will support taking care of somebody who is in need of food, of shelter, of little things. Something that they're not little on the personal scale. It means a lot, but on a big scale, it's not going to make a big difference, but it will make difference locally. So that was my focus, and I am helping, in my small way, to several people just with housing, shelter, and that's what I decided to do. That's the action. Of course, I'm talking about the war, and I am having dialogues and trying to be as open-minded as possible to educate. So that's my solution. And I feel like in every field with every big problem in the world, this is the approach that a yogi could take. First of all, analyze what, do I have faith that I can make a difference? And if you do, then find some small actions that don't bring harm but bring some benefit, and act in accordance to that. I have a few interesting stories about how Ukrainians cope with the situation because they are in the middle of it and our city is getting bombed. So my mom, actually, she's collecting a few of such stories, and I can share a couple. For example, there's an old lady who is over 90 years old, and she was living in the city throughout the entire war. She didn't leave. She couldn't even walk out of her apartment. She's too old. So she just stuck in the apartment, and every day there are bombings. So she doesn't know what's going to happen. And my aunt got a phone call from her another day, and she asked her to come over and to dye her hair because she says if she will die, she wants to die beautiful. So to look good. And that's the spirit. I think no matter what happens, and their tragedy is going to happen to us a lot, but I feel like our attitude towards it, we should try to do something that makes us feel good, no matter what, and continue our life and enjoy it to the best of our ability because there's always going to be so much. Another story is, there is a dancing school. They dance tango, and they recently resumed their classes. So now they are inviting a lot of people to come and dance with them. So during the day, people, work or hides at home, and then in the evening they sneak out and go to this dancing studio and dance tango. And they may hear bombs exploding in the city while they twirling in a dance. So their swimming pool open. Somebody is going to a swimming pool and they swim and enjoy that. So I feel like that's the good attitude when you're in the midst of it. Just remember what brings you joy and definitely get as much of that as possible to balance out all the negative thoughts that of course will come, and there's no way out. So yeah, by the way, if you have any comments or want to say something, feel free. I would love to hear your opinion on this. Also, once I think we covered the topic of the war. Of course, you can ask my dad about if you have any questions about anything. And then there's another big topic that I would like to address is the climate change and climate science. It's fascinating to see how this topic is political in the United States and what are the implications of that. Because it seems like a very objective fact and everything is measurable and it's just science. So how it could be political is mind-boggling to me. Yet that's what we're dealing with, and I'm glad to have my father by my side who studied this, who actually teaches in college the topic of adaptation to climate change. And so Swami Ramanandaji sent us a list of these green actions that outline a lot of possible things that you can do to help to create a positive impact on the global climate. Right, Swamiji?
Yes.
And I don't really know, where did this list come from? Did you assemble it or how did it come about?
A small group of us here in San Francisco formed what we call the Spiritual Action Initiative, where we try to create awareness about things like climate emergency and social justice issues. We created a website. You can find Spiritual Action Initiative. And as a part of that effort, we created that green energy checklist because we're trying to help educate people to understand many things that they can do in their daily life without going somewhere, without donating money, just any things they can do to make a difference. And if many people do that, and that was our hope, that we could spread that list, if many people would undertake those kind of activities, that it would gradually add up
Thank you, Swamiji. It's really good to have that. And that's the example of the skillful action that supposedly doesn't harm anyone and benefits someone. That's the intention. And I love to see that coming out on a community level. One thing it made me think of is the length of the list and number of items. There are a lot of things there. And this is understandable. There are so many things we could do. And with every big event, with very, very big crises, there are thousands of things we could do, and it could be overwhelming. Also, for many people, it's just there is not enough time to deal with it. It takes a lot of energy to do a lot of those things, right? It takes it's a big sacrifice. So I thought, well, there is a well-known law called Pareto law. I don't know if my pronunciation is correct, where essentially stating that 20% of effort yields 80% of outcome. So there is a way to find actions that are more impactful and require minimum amount of resources to do. And I thought, well, that would be a good framework to take in relationship to any of those big crises, to find actions that not just not harming anyone and benefiting someone, but also require the minimum amount of energy for us to use and will allow to have the maximum impact. And I asked my father to look at the list and pick some of the items that have the most amount of impact and relatively easy to do. Some items that may not have big impact and it may create complications in your life that may not be worth it and useful. So with that question, I came to my father and he prepared some answers, but his English is still not perfect. We're working on it, but he is not ready to give a talk in English. So he will say it in Russian and I will be interpreter. Okay?
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn the camera. Papa. Я задал вопрос.
Да. I think the participation of the meeting for the opportunity to speak for a more accurate presentation. I will speak Ukrainian.
I hope you understood what he said. He thanked everyone. He said that he'll need an interpreter. Very good.
We could understand him.
No, I didn't.
Сам.
Они поняли.
Они поняли, да? Да, какой вопрос?
Про 4 пункта, которые более эффективны, и 2, которые не менее.
Да. Я внимательно рассмотрел предложения, которые мне Женя предоставил, связанные с мероприятиями общественности по изменению климата.
He said he reviewed the list of those items and in relationship to the climate change, and he has some ideas.
И хочу высказать свое мнение по отношению к мероприятию.
Yeah. And so here they are.
Первое. Для того, чтобы реально противодействовать этой глобальной угрозе, мероприятия должны проходить как на международном уровне, на уровне каждого из государств и на уровне общественности.
He wants to acknowledge first that in order to really make a difference and slow down the climate change enough, the actions has to be taken not only by individuals, but also by governments, by many governments working together. It's not only individual level, but it's local government, the federal government, and countries collaborating. So he wants to just acknowledge that first.
Угроза климата действительно реальная. За постиндустриальный период или за последние 150 лет глобальная температура на земном шаре повысилась почти на 1 градус.
He says the threat is real. The temperature in the last 150 years had increased 1 degree.
Уровень мирового океана поднялся около 20 сантиметров за счет таяния ледников.
And the ocean sea level had risen for about 8 inches, roughly translating from centimeters. So it is measurable and it is true.
Участились неблагоприятные погодные проявления, такие как ураганы, штормы, бури, ливни.
And he says the nature also responds with storms and tornadoes and other natural disasters that take place due to climate change.
Основным источником выбросов парниковых газов которые способствуют глобальному потеплению, является предприятие энергетики.
And he says the main source of greenhouse gases are energy production from carbon fuel.
Мы живем в доме, который находится возле железной дороги.
For example, we're at the moment staying at the house which is facing the railroad.
Каждый день здесь по железной дороге проезжает до десятка составов с углем.
So every day we see about huge trains, couple hundred train cars filled with coal, and we see them every day.
Каждый поезд состоит из 200 вагонов
Yeah.
приблизительно.
So it's about several trains per, and each train is about 200 cars filled with coal.
В каждом вагоне находится около 60 тонн угля.
Yeah, each car of coal is about 60 tons, which is a lot of coal.
И этот уголь сжигается на электростанциях, выбросы попадают в атмосферу.
This coal is getting burned on the power plants, and all that CO2 goes in the atmosphere.
Поэтому я считаю, что самое важное мероприятие, к чему должно быть направлено внимание общественности, это энергосбережение.
Therefore, the main way to combat climate change is to cut the use of energy and saving energy.
Чем больше мы будем экономить энергию, тем меньше будет сжигаться угля и попадать в атмосферу парниковых газов.
So more energy we save ourselves, less CO2 will go in the atmosphere.
Многие дома в Соединенных Штатах Америки не имеют достаточного утепления.
And my dad noticed that a lot of houses in the United States, or houses we visited, don't have a good insulation, don't have a good way of keeping the cooling inside and heat in winter and cooling in summertime in the house.
И поэтому летом в жаркую погоду многие дома не имеют достаточной защиты от избыточного перегрева.
So in summertime, houses get overheated and air conditioning is running unnecessarily.
И поэтому эти мероприятия могут существенно сэкономить электроэнергию и сократить глобальное потепление.
So there are things that every one of us could do to save, to make a big difference for the climate change is through conserving that energy that we use to heat and cool houses.
Но на сегодняшний день предотвратить эту проблему невозможно.
You cannot eliminate this problem completely.
Поэтому мы должны уметь адаптироваться к изменению климата.
So we need to learn to adapt.
Прежде всего, адаптация нужна для сельскохозяйственных предприятий, для фермеров.
Another important area is farming.
Необходимо приобретать и высаживать более засухоустойчивые, более стойкие к высоким температурам сорта растений.
Мы же говорили о 4 вещах, которые нужно.
Да.
Это же не то совсем.
Сейчас, да.
Ага. Ну, просто мы перескакиваем на другую тему.
Да, сейчас вернемся.
My dad is also saying that with farmers, they have to adapt and grow different crops because soon crops that used to grow well are not going to do well with this heat, and so farmers will have to adapt a lot.
Но если говорить, скажем, вернуться к нашей теме энергосбережения, то здесь нельзя дать готовых рекомендаций, которые применимы во всех случаях.
So going back to the list that Swami Ramananda made, it's hard really to give the same recommendations for all people because we live in different climate zones and we have different needs, different circumstances.
Скажем, нельзя на Аляске применять те же самые мероприятия, которые применяются в Калифорнии.
For example, people who live in California and people who live in Alaska will have vastly different climate change imprint and will interact with the environment differently.
И каждый проект должен проходить оценку экологического воздействия.
And each project, each task you undertake should be analyzed in terms of how effective it is.
Да, не хочу тогда. Некоторые мероприятия, которые были предложены, мне кажется, требуют еще доработки и уточнения.
So lots of the items on the list are great. Some may need to be thought through, and some are more efficient, some are less efficient.
Ну, например, отказ от использования бумажных салфеток и использования тканевых салфеток требует уточнения.
For example, questionable items would be giving up using paper towels because
Да, да, требует полного исследования. Да.
because you really need to analyze how much energy you waste on, let's say, doing laundry when you're using reusable cloths versus how much energy you waste to produce the paper towel, which is, you know, you produce it out of tree, which is a renewable resources. Trees grow back, so it does take some energy to produce that paper towel. However, then you know, and it's compostable, so they dissolve. So you use a little bit of energy that way. But if you give up that and use cloth, and that cloth also is a cotton that grows somewhere, then gets harvested and gets transported, you made the fabric. Now you use the fabric, then you need to wash it and heat up the water and use soap. So really, paper towels may be actually better solution than using a cloth.
Хочу еще обратить внимание на такие мероприятия, которые, скажем, необходимо применять в южных регионах, такие как радикальное озеленение.
Also, he wants to offer another option to save energy is, for example, vertical greenery, creating shade with plants for the house instead of allowing sun to blast it inside and overheat the place. You can plant something on the side of the house, like green leaves that will reflect the heat.
Очень важно такое мероприятие, как окраска фасада с дорожающими красителями.
Like another simple thing would be to paint a house in light reflecting colors, which is white instead of darker. That way your house will be more energy efficient and will make a big impact.
Но опять-таки здесь нужен избирательный подход. В северных регионах это ни к чему, это нужно в южных регионах, где есть избыточная солнечная радиация.
But this, of course, is applicable for southern states, not for people who live in Alaska. In Alaska, you probably would want to paint your house black instead of white.
Требует детального изучения вопроса об отказе от посадки газонов.
Another questionable thing he saw is not planting, not having a lawn, a green lawn that you have to maintain.
С одной стороны, это правильно, потому что газоны требуют полива и расхода водных ресурсов.
For some areas, it makes sense, like California, where you need to water the lawn in order to grow, so it requires a lot of water to be used.
Но с другой стороны, земля, покрытая газоном, меньше поглощает солнечного излучения и меньше нагревается.
However, the earth that is covered in grass absorbs much less sunlight, much less heat. Therefore, when there is no grass, earth is getting hotter.
И поэтому здесь тоже нужно учитывать адаптацию и использовать газонные травы и газонную растительность, адаптированную к высоким температурам и к сушливому климату.
So my dad's saying that it is important and still to have earth covered in green stuff. You just have to adapt to the climate and see what grows well without watering it much, and using different type of grass maybe would be better than giving it up completely and then having extra heat being absorbed by a planet where there is no grass.
Ну, кроме того, необходимо
Like their signal is unstable, it looks like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Short power outage.
Ah, okay.
So we don't know when it comes back.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Let's hope that they come back soon. When they do come back, we will also be opening up for questions, either about the war or about the climate science that he's sharing. Okay, I think they've logged out and they'll probably log back in. So let's wait a moment.
Hey, Simcha, are we only speaking about those two things, or are we also allowed to touch on those?
Yeah, but first those two things.
We're about to have a storm.
Ah, well,
lightning, rain, thunder.
Wow.
okay.
And Hamsananda and I, we are on the generator, but other yoga will is cat.
I see. Okay. Okay, I see. We're having a climate event.
Yes.
Oh, boy. Ah. Well, if they don't make it back, I'll begin to carry on with some thoughts that I want to share.
Is that Snehan there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
trying to say hi. Jai Ma. Hamsananda. Om Shanti.
Well, at least we have one question here from someone. There are a few people with me here. A few of the residents and one of our students is here with us. And we did have a question from someone here, so let's take that question until they come back. Do you want to go ahead and ask?
Yeah, it's a few parts, and the scientist may actually. So my question was, how the gentleman was saying that the most important thing is faith, and then he was also talking about ignorance, and I often find myself wanting to do well, but I don't know if I'm actually going to the right places to like offer my time, money, whatever. And then he was speaking about the vehicles in the coal, or the gas. There's a big push towards electric. I'm very confused by that because up in Northern California, I live with the PSPS, the power safety shutoffs. So I'm very confused why I would buy a car that I have to plug in when I'm already not allowed to use the power for like
Okay.
4 hours every day.
There they are. Ramananda, they are back.
Okay. Okay, good. Hmm.
I apologize. We lost power for a moment due to storm. It probably is due to climate change.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Right on.
Obviously.
Arjavan, while
Yeah.
you were away, we did have a question from
Great.
someone here with me that she lives in Northern California where sometimes they have power shutoffs.
Always.
She's saying it happens frequently, and that she's questioning whether or not it makes sense to, for example, have an electric car when she knows the power is going to be down for certain periods of time on a
Wow.
regular basis. So,
I can ask my dad, or yeah. Would you like me to ask him? I'll
Please.
translate. Вопрос по поводу электрической машины. Женщина живет на Северной Калифорнии, у них бывает отключается электричество. И она говорит, есть ли смысл использовать электромобиль для помощи борьбы с глобальным потеплением?
Да, опять-таки, это вопрос неоднозначный. Дело в том, что электромобиль не загрязняет воздух в населенном пункте, там, где он ездит, но он потребляет электроэнергию. А для того, чтобы выработать эту электроэнергию, нужно где-то сжечь тот же самый уголь. И поэтому просто он переносит выбросы загрязняющих веществ из места поездки в место выработки электроэнергии.
Okay, so it's a really complex question because of first of all, yes, electric cars are good where in the city where you drive it doesn't have any exhaust, but really you need to charge it with electricity, and that electricity is being produced on a power plant that probably burns coal somewhere else. So first of all, you're not really fixing a problem if you're burning coal to charge the car. So it doesn't really have a positive impact. Just locally where you drive, yes, there is no exhaust and it's a little better for the air quality of the city. So that's the first issue with electric cars.
Но с другой стороны, в электромобилях наше будущее.
Yet my dad thinks that electric cars are the future anyways, because
Потому что появляется в мире все больше и больше электростанций, которые не выбрасывают парниковые газы.
Because there are ways to create electricity without using coal.
Скажем, атомная энергетика, если, конечно, обеспечить безопасную эксплуатацию, практически не выбрасывает окружающую среду парниковых газов.
So first of all, nuclear plants, if they build properly, they don't emit any CO2 into the atmosphere and don't contribute to climate change at all.
В момент эксплуатации гидроэлектростанций, солнечной электростанции, ветровой электростанции тоже не выбрасывают парниковых газов.
Or hydroelectric power plants and the solar panels produce electricity that is clean during the production of electricity.
Но с другой стороны, если рассматривать полный цикл продукции, то все электростанции воздействуют на окружающую природную среду в момент их строительства, монтажа и утилизации оборудования.
So speaking about electric cars, nuclear plants, hydro plants, solar panels, and all these ways to combat climate change and not have emissions, we have to consider what's called a full cycle of production. For example, solar panels don't contribute to climate change during the time where they're already installed and producing energy. However, in order to produce those panels and install them, you're going to use fossil fuel. You're going to use equipment to mine some ore, to process it, to create these panels, to manufacture, to ship, to install, to maintain, and then to dispose at the end of their life cycle. So you're going to use a lot of fossil fuels for the whole cycle. So with electric cars also, in order to produce that battery, you need to mine tons and tons of ore, and you do that with heavy equipment that uses diesel, and then you have to transport it, and it's a huge cycle. So it's really a complicated question.
С другой стороны, здесь очень важна роль общественности. Если вам не нужно нести тяжелый багаж, и вам нужно перейти на небольшое расстояние, очень преимущество, конечно, ходить пешком. Это полезно для охраны окружающей среды и для здоровья.
So at this point, it's hard to really solve this transportation question, and sometimes it's better to drive car that's not on electric, especially if it's so inconvenient. However, another thing about transportation, consider carpooling as much as possible, using bicycle or walk where it's possible. That would be a big impact.
И поэтому общественность должна повлиять на местные органы власти для того, чтобы в большем количестве строили пешеходные тротуары, развивали сеть пешеходных дорожек, велодорожек.
And in North California, we don't know how it is. Perhaps you have good walkways, but here we don't have sidewalks. So people are actually not encouraged to walk, and we have no choice but drive a car. Which this is simple thing that everyone can do. Just there'll be a big impact if we organize our local communities to, in order to create walkways, and so people can walk from place to place and they don't have to drive.
А если вам нужно поехать на машине, постарайтесь кооперироваться с соседями, чтобы машина была загружена полностью. Так тоже можно сэкономить бензин и сократить выбросы.
And to emphasize again, the carpooling is a huge advantage if you can manage to drive with somebody to town when you go, or something that will already save you 50% of energy.
Good. Let's see if anyone else who's here with us online has a question or a comment that they want to address to Arjavan or his father.
Well,
Swamiji,
let's see here. Well, this is wonderful for all of us. And my questions are, each of you, Arjavan and his father, if they would, tell us how their answer, because the solutions aren't so easy for some of us. But on a spiritual level, what is their understanding of what's going on, and how they get through it all in a spiritual sense? And how is it for Arjavan's father and mother to be here in the United States? So there is a lot there I'd like to know.
so Swamiji, let me clarify. You're asking how it is for us spiritually to be faced with the war. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and climate change, because
And
there are
climate
both of them, because you brought up the two big ones. Yes.
Yeah. See, I'll go first. Just I want to address one thing that I think is important. Spiritually, what does it mean? Spiritually, for me, I have a background with yoga, so I can answer this question. I'm afraid my father wouldn't understand what you mean by asking what is it spiritually.
Yes.
He's a scientist, so he has a different worldview, and spiritual is not clear. For me, it's definitely a Bhagavad Gita scenario, which I was entertaining since day one of being introduced to yoga. And this scenario was always present in my life, and in a way, I was ready for it. I think I understood that Arjuna is every one of us, and we are going to be faced with this situation where we divided, where we are faced with huge violence, and we cannot stop it. So we have to participate in it in a skillful way to benefit somebody and harm the least amount of people. So this is my stance. I'm trying to be very present with the situation, not go into victim mentality, and not, you know, go into the tragedy mentality, but instead I'm trying to see what action I can do to make a positive impact. Something small, something that I can do, and something that would be helpful. So this is my approach, and this is my spiritual practice. Stay in my peace, so I'm more useful, and I can, for example, host my parents and take care of them now when they had to flee the country. I can try asking this question to my father, but I don't think he'll understand what spiritually means. So is there another way to ask it?
Okay, let's see. Practically and scientifically, you've mentioned many things for us to think about and ways we can do. But it's not just black and white. It's not so easy all the time, we see. So how do your parents, or how does your father, he's the one speaking now, how does he get along with that? He knows many answers, you know, scientifically and intellectually, and what should be done. But how does he deal with what's going on uh, in a personal sense? I don't know. What do you think, Ramananda?
Yes, yes. How does he cope with it? Knowing
Yeah.
what he knows.
Understood. Okay. Папа, как ты лично переживаешь вот эти события, что происходит с войной? Как ты себя чувствуешь по этому поводу?
Да, ну, я понял. Я могу сказать, что я первые 2 месяца войны находился в Харькове.
Because for the first 2 months of the war, he was in a Kharkiv, which was bombed every day.
И только благодаря Жене, вот его уговорам, через 2 месяца после войны мы уехали в Америку.
And only because of me and 2 months of me asking them to come over and to leave their city, they agreed to do that.
Война началась в 5 утра 24 февраля.
So the war started at 5 a.m. on February 24th.
Мы утром проснулись от сильных взрывов, и кругом был дым, взрывы и шум.
They woke up to the explosions and smoke and noise.
В результате за первые 2 месяца войны в Харькове разрушили 2000 домов.
In the first 2 months, there were about 2,000 houses destroyed.
Российские войска подошли вплотную к окружной дороге.
And Russian military came right next to the city.
И за окружной дороги обстреливали жилые районы.
And they were bombing the city right from the outskirts.
Руководство города обеспечило возможность всем людям, которые не принимают непосредственное участие в боевых действиях, уехать.
Although the city government were good and they helped everyone who wanted to flee the city.
В результате до войны в Харькове жило 1,5 миллиона человек.
As a result, prior to war, there were 1.5 million people living in the city.
Под конец второго месяца войны осталось 600 тысяч.
And at the end of the second month, when he was still there, was only 600,000 people living in the
Oh.
city.
Разрушили наш университет,
They destroyed the university where he was teaching.
разрушили спортивную кафедру политехнического университета.
They destroyed the sports arena where
И
we have sporting events.
разрушили примерно половину школ, которые находятся в городе.
About half of the schools in the city are destroyed.
Ну, где-то примерно 3 недели назад наши войска пошли в наступление.
But about 3 weeks ago, Ukrainian military pushed the Russians off.
И им удалось отодвинуть российскую армию на расстоянии 20-25 километров от города.
So now they're about 15 to 20 miles away from the city, the Russian military. So they're quite far, and they cannot bomb the city the same way.
И поэтому сейчас обстрелы города продолжаются, но уже только дальнобойной артиллерией и ракетами.
So now Russians can only get their city with rockets that are being launched far away. So it's better now.
Ну,
Как ты себя чувствуешь по этому поводу? Это вопрос.
как я себя чувствую?
Да.
Сложно сказать. Я, естественно, сильно переживаю. Я ощущаю чувство несправедливости.
And to answer the question directly, he feels upset and he's worried, and my dad feels that it's not fair.
Не было у Российской Федерации никаких оснований развязывать эту войну.
He thinks that the war had no reason to take place. There was no need to attack Ukraine.
Когда я смотрю российское телевидение, вижу, что они в качестве пропаганды говорят совершенно неправильные вещи.
He hears Russian propaganda and sees how wrong it is.
В России рассказывают, что война развязана для того, чтобы защитить русскоязычное население.
Russians, for example, say that the war is happening in order to protect Russian-speaking population of Ukraine.
Я сам являюсь русскоязычным, и я ни разу не слышал в Украине, со мной ни разу не было такого, чтобы я подвергался какой-то дискриминации.
And he's a Russian-speaking Ukrainian himself, and he never was discriminated against by Ukrainians or anything like that ever happens.
И когда российская пропаганда говорит о том, что они пришли меня защищать, и таких как я, это абсолютно неправда.
So when Russian propaganda says that they're protecting Russian-speaking people of Ukraine, it's totally not true.
У нас со студентами такой принцип работы. Если студент обращается на русском языке, мы отвечаем на русском.
They have a principle in college, a rule in college, where if a student speaks to a teacher in Ukrainian, they are being spoken back in Ukrainian. When a student addresses him in Russian, he responds in Russian.
И поэтому это абсолютно необоснованная причина для войны.
So the reasons the Russian propaganda is saying all false.
Но сейчас мы ждем, когда наши партнеры нам поставят еще очередную партию вооружения для того, чтобы окончательно завершить войну.
But now my dad is anticipating, with all the help of the international community, with all support, we hope that the war will be over soon.
И мы очень надеемся на правительство Соединенных Штатов, оно нам помогает, мы благодарны.
Especially he's grateful for United States because the United States have helped Ukraine the most. And this is a great contribution that we're all grateful for.
Good.
Thank you.
What do they think should be done now? Or what do they think they're doing, Russia? Then what are they up to? If there's no point, you couldn't see a point to them invading the country. What are they up to? Why are they doing this, in your opinion? Please.
Пап спрашивает, если ты не видишь смысла в их нападении, зачем они это делают?
Они хотят захватить территории и расширить границы империи.
They have imperial ambitions. They want to expand their territory and influence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
According to my dad, that's his opinion.
They've
Они
also,
хотят президенту сделать титул императора.
They want that Putin wants to be an emperor.
Спасибо.
Let's expand our scope again to the many forms of suffering that we're witnessing in our world, and see if there are any questions or comments from anyone here about either the struggle that they've had in personally coping, or if you want to contribute something that's inspired you or helped you to not lose hope and to feel like you can do something to make a difference or to participate in change. Go ahead, Bhaktanand.
Yeah, I have a problem with weapons. I don't like any weapons. And we give so much. If the whole world makes this a place where the Ukrainians have to suffer because of, are we prolonging the war with that? Or sometimes it's not fair that just a little part of the world gets bombed to the ground. And why should that be Ukraine? I have helping Ukraine might not be helpful.
Да, она считает, что поможет поставить.
Да.
My dad wants to respond to this
Yeah,
weapon question.
I understand your question. Now I try to answer this question. Мне тоже не нравится оружие.
My dad says he hates weapons.
И, к сожалению, многим людям в Украине оно тоже не нравится.
And a lot of people in Ukraine don't like it.
В результате в Украине была очень маленькая армия, оружия было очень мало.
As a result, Ukrainian army was very weak and there was almost no weapons to begin with.
И в результате, мы, скажем, большую часть нашей территории захватило государство-агрессор.
And as a result, as a consequence of this attitude of Ukrainians and their dislike of weapons, a big chunk of Ukraine is under Russian occupation, and a lot of suffering is happening on that territory.
И теперь мы оказались заложниками того, что нам не нравилось оружие.
And now they're hostages of their own dislike of weapons. And they're reaping the consequence. So that's the answer.
В отличие от нас, в России большая часть государственного бюджета тратилась на оружие, а не на что-то другое.
And in addition to that, in Russia, they were really in love with weapons, and they had a lot of them, and that's the consequence of it we see now. They spend a lot of money on weapons.
And we see that in the United States, that weapons are widely available. And we suffer the consequences of that in our own country, not from some outside source, right? But from the people within our country.
It is the largest government spending.
I saw a documentary recently, very short piece, that depicted an 18-year-old attempting to buy alcohol. And he was turned down by the store. And they were filming this. And then he went to buy cigarettes, and the person didn't want to sell him cigarettes. They discouraged him. And then he went to buy a weapon, and no problem. He had easily, no problem. He was offered many different options and extra ammunition. So it was easier for him to buy a rifle and ammunition than it was to buy alcohol or cigarettes.
Guns and businesses have more rights than women.
That's the nature of our country. That's why I want to come back to and emphasize something that Arjuvan said from the very beginning. It seems like a crucial thing for all of us who are finding ourselves in this situation is to cope in our own hearts as best we can, work with our own emotional well-being, and keep attuning ourselves to that deeper source of strength within us. By ourselves, as individuals, what little things we can do may seem small, but when we connect ourselves to a greater source of strength, to a higher power, right, and we maintain our own equilibrium and have faith in that higher power, then at least we can, in small ways, take action. And a small action can inspire another person's small action. And we can look for ways to educate and inform each other and work together with each other. And collaboratively, we can make a difference. One of the things that your father, Yuri, recommended to us, Arjavan, was actions that take little energy and have a great impact. And that's something that Gurudev, Swami Satchidananda, encouraged us to do every day, and that is pray. Right? Pray for peace. Right? Send out peaceful energies at the end of every practice session, and for every meditation, every yoga class. So I like to at least mention that also as something that's important that we can all do. That we don't see the impact, right, visually, but we know that these energies make a difference, right? And when we send them out through a sincere heart, there are people who are relieved in some suffering from that. So I just want to mention that one idea as something that we can do regularly, all of us. It takes little energy and has its own impact. Anyone else want to share or ask something? Okay.
Hi, Swami Ramananda. This is Sandy. I have a question. So it seems like nowadays, and I hear it from people, even in the spiritual circles, that somehow when you have an opinion, what I'm going to call an opinion, that all of a sudden what you think is labeled right. And so if you are right, then somebody else who does not share your opinion is now wrong. And I struggle with that because we can never come together if you're either right or wrong.
Yeah, beautifully said, Sandy. I think you're making a beautiful point that it doesn't behoove us in a situation like this to judge someone else who no doubt is seeking to the need they have in whatever way they know. Arjavan said something about this in the beginning. Even the Russian people may feel like they can't really do anything. So it doesn't behoove us to blame all the Russian people as bad, as wrong. Right? It doesn't behoove us to blame those who are against the abortion rights if we think that's the wrong stance. It doesn't help if we divide ourselves further and further according to our political party or our ideology or our values. Even as yogis, it doesn't help for us to say, oh, we're the yogis and you guys are not as yogi, you're not as holy as we are. Right? That doesn't help. Right? We need to find ways to come together, right, to erase those lines that divide us. So I think you're bringing up a very important point. Just because we don't like a certain politician or a certain political party, if we label those people and divide ourselves from them and we can't find common ground and work together, we just make things worse.
Can Arjavan translate that to his father?
Разделение по идеологии не на языковом, не на национальному барьеру, а по политическим убеждениям разделение. Есть, скажем, люди, которые привержены, скажем, к правам человека, к свободе выбора, а есть люди, которые требуют, чтобы был царь, который дает им приказы. Есть люди, которые любят жить, как написано в законе, а есть люди, которые ждут, пока им скажут, что им нужно делать.
Yeah, I think my translation sort of my dad to reflect on the difference in beliefs between Russians and Ukrainians. One side believes this and the other believes this, and how to overcome the conflict of that. And my father said, well, in this case, it's simple. It's not your opinion against somebody else's opinion. It's really one side is supporting a tyrannical government, like one person who is has authority and they imposing their authority on another nation, and it's a violent action. And the other one is defending themselves. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward for him, and it's really about one side recognizing that they're causing violence. But not all the situations are black and white like this. That's true that we are being divided. I don't think we have an answer.
Ну, здесь в подтверждение нужно добавить. Есть что добавить?
Смотри, вопрос в том, что несмотря ни на какие проблемы, мы разделяемся на разные лагеря по разным вопросам. Как преодолеть вот это разделение на разные
Как преодоление, я думаю, что информированность.
And he says that the most important thing is to inform each other, to talk.
Yeah. Then here with me in the Institute, I have a couple of people that have questions or comments. So go ahead, Snehan.
Okay, thank you, Sanji. When Arjavan spoke about how you received what was happening as it was happening, and you mentioned shock and these other elements, I was relating to 9/11, and some of us here were in New York at 9/11. So that first stage was shock, like how could this actually be happening? It was unbelievable. The site, we had never seen anything like that before. So it was a shock to the system. And then it seemed like the reactions were twofold. One was a balance of taking care of oneself and taking care of others. So many of us who have our needs taken care of came together. The immediate impulse was to do something to feel useful, just what you said. So I think these are common reactions. I have to take care of my fellow beings, not just humans, but what's going on here. That community comes together automatically under that kind of strife. And then there's the balance of that with I actually have to take care of myself now, as we all became overwhelmed with the massive news support, the news reports that were endless. I can't watch this anymore. I have to take care of myself and do something else, which I love how you said, do something that you really love, that you like, to balance it out. And then I just want to share one quick thing with you, which was I was watching the news, as I don't very often do, maybe once or twice a week. And I saw a report last night about a WNBA player whose wife has been detained in the Ukraine and is being charged with some kind of a made-up.
In Russia, not Ukraine.
Russia.
She was detained in Russia?
Yes.
Russia.
Okay, so she's detained in Russia. And she said that it still applies because she said that there's no real justice system there, that by the time something goes to court in Russia, it's documented there's like a 98% guilty rate. So now they're preparing not for a defense, but for what to do about that inevitability for her. And the only recourse they have is through our government. So because this woman is famous and her wife is the person that's in question, she's going to the president. And she has the ability to go to the president to ask to be included in on a pardon. And that, when that was reported, made me feel like, what? How is that okay, fair, really? I mean, you know what? A couple of people get to be considered. And you're asking for government to be a little bit more fair and approach it. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time. Om Shanti.
And we have one other person here with us who has a question or comment.
Would you like me to come or stay?
Why don't you come closer? I'll ask her to come nearer the mic.
Hi. Yeah, so first is I wanted to say that I appreciate that you take the science very seriously. A few years back, I took a basic chemistry class, high school education level, and in that we were provided a very simple chemical equation that proved that that the climate is changing, and it was just so simple and so straightforward. I mean, you can't argue with like math, you know. So it's just baffling that it's an argument. I was also under the impression that the terminology has now changed to climate crisis instead of climate change, because the climate is changing and that's okay, but what we're now in is a crisis. Lastly, how we're talking about the important thing is having these kinds of conversations and talking about it. For me, I have a hard time knowing where to get the information and who I can trust, because oftentimes it feels like I'm being lied to.
Yeah, manipulated.
Thank you.
Ответите, не слышу.
My dad wants to address a few points you mentioned. Would it be okay if he responds to that? Sources of information first.
При Организации Объединенных Наций существует международная группа экспертов по вопросам изменения климата.
He says United Nations has a body of an institution that is dealing with climate change in the United Nations.
Эта группа самостоятельные исследования не проводит, но она собирает и обобщает материалы со всех медиастанций земного шара.
So that United Nations institution collects data from the entire world and analyzes it.
И после этого выводит средние данные и дает источники информации.
So that organization has best world experts, and they all analyze this data and post it online.
Более точных данных найти нельзя. У них, конечно, есть неточности, связанные с погрешностью термометра, манометра, денсиметра, но это наиболее точные данные, которые на сегодня есть в мире.
So these are the most accurate. This is the most accurate data and most reliable in the world. So it is not listening to somebody's opinion, but you can refer to this international organization with a lot of experts. And of course, there are some errors and inaccuracies, but all of those are only due to making projections in the future, and only also about inaccuracies in measuring, because it's not always easy to measure something properly. And also we have a history of wrong measurements from the past because of the tools that we used were not sophisticated.
Если вам нужно найти какие-то региональные данные по изменению климата, то вы можете зайти на сайт вашей региональной метеостанции и посмотреть архив прогноза погоды, архив погоды.
Mm-hmm. You can also collect data yourself. You can find the records of things like weather reports throughout years from your, I don't know the English name for that, or where they measure.
Гидрометцентр.
Yeah, I don't know that name. Place where they
Weather
measure.
Center, National Weather Center.
Yeah, maybe National Weather Center. I don't know if they exist in the States with the same name. So there is a way to find accurate information. You just have to look for authoritative source and not listen to somebody's opinion. I guess that's his point.
Да, вот, по крайней мере, во многих странах, я не знаю, как в Соединенных Штатах, наверное, тоже, запрещено скрывать от общественности экологическую информацию.
And he says also each country actually bans, like United States, for example, they ban withholding the accurate information from public. So each government is required to share information on, for example, how much a factory, how much waste they put in the water. They have to, by law, report that, and you have access to that.
But my understanding is these tests are done by private companies that can be hired by the people who's buying them. And I've heard of multiple instances where they don't use the correct tools so that it doesn't measure the things. Sure, they're providing the information, but they're not actually.
Она говорит, что это органы, которые, допустим, измеряют загрязнения, могут быть коррумпированы, их подкупают, они, допустим, фабрика какая-то может собрать выбросы.
Да, фабрика может собрать выбросы, мы мониторинг состояния окружающей природной среды. У нас, например, уголовная ответственность за предоставление ложной информации или за непредоставление информации в Украине. По крайней мере, есть уголовная ответственность.
He says, yeah, of course, corruption is present, but it is also a felony, at least in Ukraine, to lie about this stuff. So it's, I guess that's the case. So there's probably sometimes you have corruption, but it's not everywhere because it's a felony, at least in Ukraine.
Хотя, с другой стороны, есть корпоративные интересы, есть сайты различных коммерческих организаций, которые дают ложную информацию.
He says it's definitely the case where there's a lot of disinformation about that stuff.
И здесь, например, производители энергосберегающего оборудования, солнечных ветровых электростанций очень часто склонны, скажем, запугивать население страшными последствиями.
There's also, it actually happens on both sides. It happens on the side of factories that lie about their emissions. It happens on the side of, let's say, green energy companies that promise some impossible solutions or make claims that are completely not based on reality.
Очень много туристических агентств, которые дают неточную информацию по экологической ситуации в связи с тем, что им нужно получать дополнительные доходы от своего там места рекреации.
Even places that benefit from tourism would lie about how clean their environment is in order to attract more tourists. So everyone has their interest and everyone is not so truthful. So it's a good point you made. It's hard to dig the truth out of it.
Last little bit. Are we in a
Very quick,
yeah?
because we're almost toward the end.
Are we in a climate crisis? If that's not important. To you.
What did she say?
He's asking if would we characterize it as a climate crisis?
Versus climate change.
We should, before we talk, we should inform ourselves.
Thank you.
It's not a yes or no question. It's a nuanced question.
Yeah.
Answer. So it may not be a time because crisis is a big word.
Я считаю, что о климатическом кризисе сегодня говорить преждевременно.
Yeah. Today it's not a crisis. However,
но если не принимать комплексные меры, то климатический кризис к концу века может наступить.
But it will definitely take place if we don't take right actions now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good. That's a good answer. On behalf of all of us, make sure that you thank your father. It really makes a difference to have someone who knows what they're talking about when we talk about the climate. And for sharing about the situation in Ukraine as well. I just want to mention that any contributions that anyone made for this program will go towards relief in Ukraine, either through the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation or to that GoFundMe that they started at Yogaville. I was informed they started a GoFundMe account for the support of your parents, Arjavan. So we'll be making some contribution to that source as well. There's just a couple people here that haven't shared anything. Annie, I don't know if you want to share or ask anything before we close.
So much, but on a real pragmatic level, what was the name in response to Shannon's question about the organization that provides scientific, completely unbiased information that we can get online?
Он спрашивает имя организации вот этой Объединенных Наций.
Организация Объединенных Наций называется Международная группа экспертов по вопросу изменения климата.
Well, my dad is giving me the Russian name, but it's United Nations. United Nations have a department. It's a international collective of experts. He says it's on United Nations website. I don't know the English name of that.
Yeah, that's correct. United Nations.
But United Nations have a department that deals with that specifically, and it's an international group of experts.
What's that called?
Well, I know the Russian name. I can Google it real quick and get you the.
United Nations
If you simply
document.
look on the United Nations website, you can find there.
Yeah, that's great. I just figured there was a lot of stuff there, but thank you. I will do that very much. And thank you for asking me, Ramanand, if I had a question.
And
Good.
before we have an opinion, we should always inform ourselves instead of just talking about one book we read or one article we read in the newspaper or somewhere. Always inform ourselves. I have learned that from your father today. Thank you.
I want to read something that I found inspiring. One of the sources that I turn to sometimes when there's a lot of darkness in the world is poetry. And this poem that I want to read is something that inspires me, that I think is an example of something that requires very little energy from us that can make a difference in the world as we move through it. The poem is called Because, and it's by a contemporary poet called Rosemary Trommer. So I can't save the world, can't save even myself, can't wrap my arms around every frightened child, can't foster peace among nations, can't bring love to all who feel unlovable. So I practice opening my heart right here in this room and being gentle with my insufficiency. I practice walking down the street heart first. And if it is insufficient to share love, I will practice loving anyway. I want to converse about truth, about trust. I want to invite compassion into every interaction. One willing heart can't stop a war. One willing heart can't feed all the hungry. And sometimes, daunted by a task too big, I tell myself, what's the use of trying? But today, the invitation is clear to be ridiculously courageous in love, to open the heart like a lilac in May, knowing the freeze is possible and opening anyway. To take love seriously, to give love wildly, to race up to the world as if I were a puppy, adoring and unjaded, stumbling on my own exuberance, to feel the shock of indifference, of anger, of cruelty, of fear, and stay open, to love as if it matters, as if the world depends on it. That's the poem.
Thank you.
Yeah. I
Thank
take
you,
heart
Ramanandaji.
hearing words like that can inspire us to make a difference with the way that we interact with each other, and to continue our spiritual practice that keeps us in touch with that deeper source of guidance that will show us the way to live in this time. Any final comment from you, Arjavan?
Well, nothing but gratitude. I want to say thank you for everyone to joining. It means a lot to me to see so much abundant support. I've experienced it from the first day, and it doesn't dry out. They just constantly. I definitely see a lot of yogic actions in this community, and I'm very moved by that. Thank you.
Arjun.
You and your father for joining us.
Thanks for the coffee.
Okay. So let's end by chanting Loka Samasta mantra 3 times. And I can suggest that everyone bring their hands to the heart, close their eyes, so that as we chant, we're fully present and we feel we're sending this healing energy out through the heart. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May the light of truth dispel all ignorance. Victory to that light. Jai Sri Satguru Maharaj Ki.
Jai.
Okay, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to mention that in the chat, I sent the link to the website. My dad found the website that you can find all this information.
Okay,
And where?
It's ipct.ch. It's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's like international body that researches that in depth and have good quality information.
Thank you so
Good,
much.
good.
Will this program that we just watched be available to anyone who missed it?
Yes, we've recorded it. And we'll keep the recording, and I can send it out to all of you if you want to share it with anyone.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you all. Good to
Thank
see you.
Thank
Thank you. Great to see you, Bhaktananda Hamsanan.
Yes,
Sandy, thanks for joining us.
thank you. Arjavan, Father, thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow,
Good
Annie.
to see you. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye Hamsanandaji. Bye Bhaktivinoda.
Om Shanti.
Thank you.
Shanti.
Ciao.
Thank you so much.